Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt. My name is Matt and I'm joined by Stefan and Ben to discuss Fulham's imminent signing of Emile Smith Rowe. The Arsenal player is expected to make the move to Craven Cottage for a fee of around €41.5 million. Ben, you watch a lot of Arsenal. What do you make of this deal?
Yeah, it's a surprising one. In terms of, I think if you told an Arsenal fan 3 years ago during that 2021-22 season that Smith Rowe would be leaving for around €40 million in around 2 years' time, I don't think anyone would have believed you. I've watched a lot of Smith Rowe back from, I remember even watching him in the FA Youth Cup in the, I think it was 2017-18 season, and you could tell from then he was a mercurial talent. His ability to run with the ball at such pace and drift around players, you could tell even at that age he had an ability that not many other players had. I think Arsenal got to the final of the FA Youth Cup that year and lost to Chelsea, but Smith Rowe was the clear shining light. And then you had a few years where sort of Arsenal fans were waiting for Smith Rowe to make that impact in the first team. He had loan spells at RB Leipzig and Huddersfield, but there were injury concerns already. I remember I used to work with Ray Parlour, the former Arsenal midfielder, and he was explaining to me that he'd had this groin issue from a really young age at Arsenal, and it has led to a lot of problems. However, in that 2021-22 season, he really did break through at Arsenal. He scored 12 goals. He was arguably the player of the season, and when times were hard, when they had a really tough start to the season, there was pressure on Arteta. He was often the one dragging Arsenal through games. And it was so pleasing on the eye. He made his England debut that season. He scored to the Three Lions. It looked like the world was at his feet. It's such a good talent. However, those injuries persisted to be a problem and are essentially probably the reason that Arsenal are allowing him to leave this summer. I think he's missed 111 games in 5 seasons. And that's for Arsenal and a few for RB Leipzig as well when he was on loan in Germany. But that's just too many to be able to be relied on. There was rumours in the season when Arsenal first missed out on the title in the 22-23 season that Arteta was sort of moulding Smith Rowe to play that number 8 role, where the departing Granit Xhaka had previously played, and we saw Kai Havertz and Declan Rice sort of share that role last season. And Smith Rowe, when he did get minutes last season, came into that role again. But injuries again have just meant it's been so difficult for Arteta to rely on Smith Rowe. Arteta said last season, when Arsenal had their infamous trip to Dubai that turned the season round, that he actually apologised for the lack of minutes he's been able to give to Smith Rowe. And a couple of months later, when he did start against Luton, put in a man of the match performance, got an assist, Arteta said after the game that he loved watching Smith Rowe and that the player was a joy to watch. So it's clear that on Arteta's side, he knows the ability Smith Rowe has, but the problem is where the margins are so small between Arsenal and Man City right now, they've got to be ruthless. And if there's a player that's going to miss that many games and you can cash him in for around €40 million in terms of the world we're living in now with PSR and financial fair play, it's a deal that it's a ruthless deal, and a lot of fans would be very disappointed to see Smith Rowe leave. It's a deal that does make sense financially, potentially. But if Fulham can keep the player fit, then I think €40 million is a bargain because he's got so much talent. But there is that fear that the injuries are going to continue to plague his career, and the reason why he's leaving Arsenal.
Stefan, how do you think this move leaves the Arsenal squad? Do you think there's a risk there losing one of their attacking players, or do you think that they're shaping up nicely for the season ahead?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I think Ben put it perfectly well why Smith Rowe is so highly regarded at Arsenal, but ultimately why he's had to move on. The situation with Smith Rowe at Arsenal obviously has been dominated by his injuries, but the other huge factor as well is obviously the emergence of Martin Odegaard. He's obviously come in from Real Madrid and slowly but surely has really established himself as the kind of playmaker in chief in that Arsenal team, and more or less playing and becoming the player that Smith Rowe kind of hoped to be maybe 2 or 3 years ago before injury really kind of struck. And you can't really overstate just the importance of Odegaard in this team from the get-go, just how many games he plays. I just checked before we came on air there, and he's only missed 9 games for club and country since he joined Arsenal, which is just a ludicrous, small injury record. So if Smith Rowe had even been fit and ready to kind of step in as a number 10 or as an inside forward, as most Martin Odegaard plays for Arsenal, he may not have had much chance or opportunities to begin with. Of course, he would have been swapped in and out from time to time, but it just goes to show, and actually, Fabio Vieira, who's a kind of similar player, has obviously struggled with injury as well, but he's also struggled to be substituted in at times just because of Arsenal's reliance on Odegaard. And I think that's something that kind of works as a kind of double-edged sword for Arsenal going forward. Odegaard's an outstanding player, one of the best players in the Premier League, one of the best playmakers in the Premier League, undoubtedly. But with all that talent does come in a dependency, which I think Arteta will have to kind of work on, maybe kind of making sure he has a plan B or C next season. In terms of assists, they're right up there, but even if you kind of look at the more kind of detailed stats, such as key passes, which are, is a pass that leads to a shot. Last season, Odegaard was top with 102. Saka was second with 91, which is obviously very impressive. But then once you drop off that, you go right down to 47 for Declan Rice and then 46 for Kai Havertz. So the next best midfielder in that team is basically put up half as many key passes as Odegaard. Similarly, if you go to something more straightforward, like simple passes into the penalty box, again, Odegaard's way ahead of the rest of Arsenal with 130. Saka, again, 73. And in the third place is actually Zinchenko with 49. And we kind of saw moments like that last season. I don't want to put too much emphasis on it because I feel like I've mentioned it a few times in this podcast, and I don't want it to kind of define Arsenal's season, but I do keep going back to those Champions League ties against Bayern Munich where Arsenal dominated possession, but because Bayern did a decent job of kind of marking Odegaard out of the team, Arteta's team did look a little lost for opportunity or lost for kind of options. And in terms of players who could really kind of pull the strings there, in an ideal world, Smith Rowe would have been the kind of guy that you can bring on either in place of Odegaard or alongside Odegaard to kind of play a second playmaker. And that just hasn't really worked out. And as Ben says, hopefully he kind of goes on to bigger and better things at Fulham. But you would think that Arteta's, not maybe his main priority, but one of his biggest priorities this summer, now that Smith Rowe is moving on, is they do find a way to bring in another playmaker, either through a player who's in that squad or signing a player in the transfer window.
Well, I think from a financial perspective, it's definitely going to be a big help. €41.5 million will be the biggest sale in Arsenal's history, which for a player, as Ben mentioned, who's missed so much football over the last 4 or 5 years, I think is good business purely from a financial sense. Ben, looking at Arsenal next season, how do you think that midfield is going to shape up under Mikel Arteta?
I think a lot of it depends on what happens with Thomas Partey. I think if Thomas Partey stays, then Declan Rice and Thomas Partey stays fit, which has been a massive issue as well. Thomas Partey will play the holding midfield role, Declan Rice will play the 8, and Odegaard will play the 10. Just in terms of what you were saying then about the finance and stuff, it has been an area Arsenal have been so poor at in recent years. I think they've sort of got to the area in their development and their project now where they need to be cashing in for players. We saw it when Pep Guardiola first came to Man City. At first, they were splashing all sorts of money, spending 120 million on fullbacks in one window. The net spend was horrific, but they sort of had to do that to get to the levels they wanted to be at. Arsenal have had to do that as well, and they found a way to do that in terms of laying off players on big wages such as Aubameyang and Ozil and making their wage bill significantly lower than Liverpool and Man City, and finding ways to do that. But now, to be sustainable, you need to start making the money back as well, because in recent seasons we've seen City's net spend has actually been really good. They've let the likes of Sane, Jesus, Sterling go for big money, and they're actually balancing the books quite well. And Arsenal will need to get to that position as well at some point if they're going to consistently compete at that level. So in terms of pure profit, 41 million for Smith Rowe does make sense. But yeah, in terms of the midfield next season, I do see it being either Thomas Partey or Arsenal will bring in another holding midfield player, because I believe Declan Rice was brought in to play that number 8 role. But because of Partey's injury last season, he was forced to play holding midfield a lot more than probably Arteta would have wanted. But yeah, I think the priority probably for Arsenal now will be to bring in a winger as well, because Smith Rowe obviously did play a lot on the left wing for Arsenal. He was actually starting there that season when he was so well, and then he got injured and Martinelli came in, and then Martinelli had such an impact. Since then, Smith Rowe's never really been able to get back in that position. So I see Arsenal probably targeting a left winger and a midfielder, as well as the incoming of Calafiori.
Let us know down in the comments if you think this is the right move for Emile Smith Rowe, and if you think it's the right move for Fulham. I think with this signing and the imminent signing of Ryan Sessegnon as well, they're bringing in a lot of talent, but definitely a big risk factor with 2 players who've struggled a lot with injuries over the last couple of years. If you want more chats like this throughout the summer, do make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the like button if you've enjoyed this one in particular. But for now, thanks for watching.